When we think of Hollywood, we think of how cool their movies are, how wild the car chase scenes are, or how sweet the romance is, or even how crazy the story is. But how did Hollywood become what it is today? Hollywood itself started off in the early 20th century, but did not begin to flourish until the 1920s. Without Nickelodeons or 5-cent movie theaters, the movie industry would have never reached popularity and appeal from the public that it does today. In the 1920s, Hollywood was considered a cultural icon set, aside from Los Angeles, famous for its leisure and the party scene. Hollywood also was the birthplace of many movie studios such as Paramount, Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, and many more. But it wasn't until the 1930s that Hollywood reached its peak by the discovery of adding audio, color, and new genres into their movies, which helped produce higher quality films, making more people inclined to spend their free time at the local movie theater. However, with all its newfound power to reach vast audiences, came power to create and perpetuate stereotypes. Throughout the later half of the 20th century, Hollywood largely left out people of color altogether, and when included, people of color character roles were given mainly to actors of European descent, who used makeup and poor accents in an effort to fit into their roles.
But that was 2 weeks ago! You cannot go on or keep ringing my bell! You disturb me!
But why? The answer is, well, demographics. Back in the later half of the 20th century, the majority of America was predominantly white, and so was Hollywood. As a result, many directors and producers felt that by casting non-white actors, they would disenfranchise white audiences who largely outnumbered minorities. However, this number is changing. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the number of non-white minorities in the U.S. will surpass the white population by 2050. So with the changing demographics, has representation changed too? Not quite. Even today, white actors are cast for roles meant for people of color. Yet, instead of face paint and heavy makeup, the roles themselves are redefined to fit white actors. Take the Ancient One in Doctor Strange, for example. Originally in the comics, the Ancient One was written as a Tibetan monk. In the movie adaptation, the Ancient One was Irish. Or, in the movie Aloha, Allison a native Hawaiian, Chinese, Swedish American, was played by Emma Stone. This phenomenon is widely used throughout Hollywood today. But why is this significant? For the answer to this question, we interviewed Yumna Khan, a founder and producer of Stranger Magic Productions, as well as the creator of the show Unfair and Ugly, which tackles issues related to Indian Americans from a comedic standpoint.
Having diversity in Hollywood is so important because most people don't realize this. It's what you see in the media is how you perceive the world around you to be. And when you don't see communities being represented accurately, then that's the idea that you have of a certain group or a person. So the more stories that we see that are inclusive, the more inclusive we'll be with our communities and our world. So having more inclusive storytelling will only make the world a better place because it humanizes people from different backgrounds, and we're not just one-dimensional characters. But when we have stories that introduce people of color as three-dimensional, multi-dimensional characters, then there's a whole world around them, and there's more empathy created around these groups and people.
And Yumna's not wrong. For decades, tropes created and enforced in movies have created stereotypes which disenfranchise Americans that are people of color with Americans that are white, which devalue their stories, background, and identity. In addition, this misrepresentation can create stereotypes about an entire group of people. For example, African American women being classified as the black sassy friend, such as Donna Meagle from Parks and Recreation, or Asian Americans being cheap, such as Apu from The Simpsons. But why is this still happening? For that, we'll have to look behind the camera. According to the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report, only 7.6% of show creators, 12.6% directors, and 21.9% film roles were given to people of color. In addition, gatekeepers, the people who greenlight or fund films, are predominantly white, meaning the stories that are created by people of color generally tend to receive a lack of support and funding for their films.
There's still a huge problem with diversity in Hollywood because the film industry still functions out of the straight white boys club, and that's a huge problem because a lot of times people of color are completely erased from the picture, and the studios think that non-white cast members won't be relatable on screen to audiences. However, there is a huge demand to see more people that look like you and I, and it's important to have more accurate representations of that. So now that we have new digital media, it's been a lot more I don't want to say easier, but it's a lot more accessible for people to be more inclusive with their storytelling.
But there's one thing that's changing. Representation sells. And Hollywood is starting to recognize this. Crazy Rich Asians, for instance, made $238.5 million at box office. Coco made $807.1 million, and Black Panther made $1.334 billion. So as a result, is Hollywood becoming more diverse?
Hollywood is slowly changing, and we don't see change as much in the film industry, but in the television industry there has been a lot more happening with different sitcoms out there, like Fresh Off the Boat, we have Blackish, and those are all really great stories of communities that are often times underrepresented. But seeing more television shows like this just makes it feel like things are getting better. However, as hard as it is to say this, because I love seeing how much change there is, sometimes when you take one step forward you only move 2 steps backwards, and that's how our film industry is. So I really hope that it continues to get better from here, and that TV industry is like really great right now. And even with digital media, things are definitely getting better too in that space, because more people, more filmmakers are coming out and telling their stories and sharing their narratives.
As of now, Hollywood still has a long way to go in terms of representation of people of color. However, there is no doubt that progress is being made as people in the entertainment industry are being held accountable.
It is the first studio film with an Asian American lead since Ghost in the Shell and Aloha.
One example is in 2019 film Hellboy. Originally, British actor Ed Skrein, well known for his role in Deadpool, was cast to play Ben Daimyo, a Japanese American. After receiving a backlash for this decision, Skrein soon took to Twitter announcing that he turned down the role. Skrein stated, "It is clear that representing this character in a culturally accurate way holds significance for people, and to neglect this responsibility would continue a worrying tendency to obscure ethnic minority stories and voices in the arts." Adding, "I feel it is important to honor and respect that." He ended his statement with, "I hope it makes a difference." It certainly did. The producers of Hellboy proceeded to cast Asian American Daniel Dae Kim for the role. Skrine's decision to turn down a role that was meant for people of color represents a shift away from the past of whitewashing and a step forward in greater representation for all.